And then you consider the climate in which we're trying to survive, right, while getting our legs kicked out from under us by the pandemic, right? Trump and Trump wannabes have been very hard on the stability of local Green Party chapters. Greens have faced anyone but years, but 2020 and Trump is a new level. Anyone but Trump, plus COVID made a really hostile environment for Greens.
Yeah.
And this continued, right? We saw it still in 2020. Trump's not on the ballot, right? But Trumpism is.
We had it really hard in Pennsylvania this year.
Yeah.
The Republican in particular who's running for governor in Pennsylvania was very much Trumper, super extremist conservative type, was involved in the January 6th stuff, like really deep into that hole. And so the election essentially became this big proxy battle between the Republican and the Democrat, that the messaging in the media, which is not necessarily the truth of the detail that was going on, is that it was essentially a vote on whether or not Pennsylvania was going to keep or criminalize abortion. The Republican candidate said he wanted to. The Democratic candidate said, well, I'm not really going to. And so, this became the answer that, like, whenever we talked about the Green Party, it was always like, well, I support the Greens, but, I can't, this isn't the year to do that because I have to vote for abortion. And, one problem with this, of course, is a bunch of the Democrats in the state are anti-abortion themselves, including my Democratic state representative. And I have been harping on this for years. And
mine too, in Illinois.
I can't get any Democrat from any, like, the entire time on social media, they were saying, like, this election is about abortion, and Democrats support abortion. I'd always reply with, like, my screenshot of, like, my state representative saying how she's pro-life and she's completely, against abortion, all saying, like, what about this? And never got a response. And so, there's the one hand where it's completely understandable that we don't want to put fascists in office, but at the same time, the neoliberalism of the Democratic Party is sliding us toward fascism anyway. And so, it's a really difficult thing that I think we have to come up with better messaging around, right? How do we grow the Green Party and the Green message, the message for an independent thing beyond the duopoly? Because the duopoly has failed us, and the party, or not the party, the nation, right? The country has been sliding to the right for decades now, regardless of what the Democrats say they're going to do or not do, right? So, I think there is a strong message we can have about the need for an independent party, but I don't know if our messaging was necessarily good enough. I don't think it really was good enough in 2020, especially to really overcome all of that.
Yeah, and when we look at anyone but Trump continuing, right? Into the 2022, and it'll be present in at least in Illinois. 2023 is when we elect our school boards and our municipal candidates, and the Trumpers are alive and well at the local level too, right? School boards are a big area where they've been pushing, where you've seen a big right wing push on to get into school boards and really fuck up our education system worse than the misleadership that's in office already is. And so we don't want to dismiss this out hand, right? There's a reason to be fearful of this type of stuff, right? But we need to have real strategic conversations. We need to have honest conversations about how do you actually resist Trump, right? Is electing Biden and Democrats who maintain many of the Trumpist policies, resisting him? Is that how resistance works? And what are we actually getting out of these things? And I also think it's an important conversation about long-term and short-term. Defeating a green, presidential candidate, the Hawkins Walker campaign in 2020, the likelihood of us being able to defeat Trump, right, to win the election wasn't really on the table as that much, right? It was an extreme outside thing, right? Bordering on nothing. So how do we deal with that as Greens, right? And we're talking about local chapters, and we start with it local, right? Yelling at somebody across the country on the internet is not going to change their mind. It almost never does. Even the people who do it often, couch it in, well, I'm trying to talk to the people who are watching the fight, not to the person I'm fighting. But even that's not really working much, right? Where we can change people's minds are on the ground or with real relationships with real people, right? And so I think Garrett's absolutely correct about consistent messaging, but we've got to make sure we're taking that message to our neighbors, right? On a past 101, we had someone ask, where do they start knocking on doors in their neighborhood to deep canvas? And I said, your neighbor, and then your neighbor on the other side, and then the neighbor on the other side of them, and then on them, and then across the street. You start right next to you and you expand outward, right? Because those are the people that you share common conditions with, right? That you live under the same conditions in your community. You have similar problems. You may, they're not all the same, but there's a connectivity there that can overcome. And that's where our messaging can work, right? Garrett talking to state level Dems on Facebook and saying, well, you're actively supporting anti-abortion Democrats, right? My state rep is also anti-abortion, also anti-gay marriage, also and she's a Democrat. Also, she voted against civil unions. She voted against gay marriage. She voted in favor of gay conversion therapy. She voted against decriminalization of marijuana. She voted against medical marijuana. She voted against legalization of marijuana. She supports abortion restrictions, right? She wasn't even primaried. No one challenged her.
Yeah.
Right. And the Republicans don't challenge her. Right. Why would they? They've got their votes. She's going to vote with them. Right. And when if you're fighting it with someone with PA Dems, right, on the state level, they're just going to blow you off and ignore it. They don't want to acknowledge that truth because it undermines their messaging. But you start talking to your neighbor who you see has a get your rosaries off my ovaries sign on their car, right? You start talking to them and you say, the Democrat that you voted for opposes you on this, right?
Funny enough, I had exactly that experience because a couple weeks before the election this year, everyone's yard signs went out, right? And so walking through the neighborhood, I noticed that down the street, there were a couple of neighbors that put out their yard signs, and there were 2 yard signs sitting next to each other. One was something like you had mentioned, right? Something pro-abortion, right? And in fact, I think it was a rainbow flag. It was like pro-LGBT rights, pro-abortion, all that sort of stuff. Very clearly a leftist person, right? A leftist-leaning person. And then right next to the sign for the pro-life conservative blue dog Democrat, I had to they weren't home at the time when I talked to them, unfortunately, or thought about talking to them, unfortunately, but I had to write down their address to be like, this is somebody I need to talk to real soon, because like they very clearly don't realize who it is they're actually voting for. And who they're supporting, because like you're saying, this is somebody who's been a Democrat that's gone unchallenged even in the primaries for years now. They hide that sort of person behind the facade. This is where I get really irritated by so-called progressive Democrats, because they give the party this more progressive feel and allow the more conservative ones to kind of hide. Right. They help kind of smooth over the image of the Democratic Party instead of what it really is, which is actually, a much more conservative right-wing party than a lot of people realize. And I think that's part of our messaging as Greens, that there really are 2 parties, the 2 sides of the same coin.
Yeah. Even Bernie goes out and stumps for anti-choice Democrats. And he's done it for decades. But yeah, Trumpism's been really hard. And I also want to say Trumpism is the current manifestation, right? Every single election, these Democrats are often going to say, now's not the time, right? Because they fundamentally don't actually support us, right? In many states, my state is very Democratic controlled, right? Garrett also is a Democratic controlled state. It's the Democrats who are actively keeping us off the ballot, right? They literally don't want us to exist as a party. So when someone says now's not the time, that isn't necessarily an invite to argue. That's a pretty clear projection that they don't actually support our right to exist, period. It's not a strategic difference. It's a fundamental lack of, acceptance of us existing as a party and challenging their claim to own everything right of the or to the left of the Democrats, which is like everything. Or to the left of the Republicans, which is like everything except fascists, right? So I think we need to keep that in mind, right? When Trumpism fades, there will be another one, right? We went through anyone but Bush, right? And we went through we've been through these phases before. I know in 2020, during the 2020 campaign, Ralph Nader told us, this was worse than 2004. What we were facing, and Jill and Ajamu told us the same thing, right? And Jill and Ajamu in 2016, they tried something interesting. They tried to elevate us to see if we would fall on our faces, and what they found out was that we have publicly popular policies, right? Putting Jill and Ajamu on CNN and kind of lifting the mainstream media blackout of them didn't hurt us. It led us to great, to some of our, I think probably definitely the best results since Nader, right? And so the best results in 20 years. So when 2020 came around, the blackout came back with a vengeance, right? Democracy Now! Wouldn't even cover the Green Party campaign in 2020, right? Supposedly progressive media was all down for Biden, in a silent way, like DSA. We're going to stay out of it, which is a de facto endorsement of Biden, right? So this anti-Trump movement, but Trump really scaled it up. But even after this fades out, there will be something new, right? That we have to address. So this is a problem that we're always going to be facing, as long as we have a system that encourages two-party rule. As long as we have first past the post single member districts.